Spare me, please, your heartfelt tributes to Daniel Ellsberg, unless you follow it up with free Julian Assange. Free Julian Assange. The man who leaked the Pentagon Papers, Daniel Ellsberg, is dead at the age of 92. Called the most dangerous American, in the 1960s, Ellsberg was an assistant to the Secretary of Defense during the buildup of troops in Vietnam. Then, working for the State Department, Ellsberg spent 2 years in Vietnam while the war was raging. Upon returning from Vietnam in 1967, with 500,000 Americans fighting and dying over there, he began working on a secret Pentagon project known as the Pentagon Papers, which reviewed all the classified documents surrounding the lead-up to American involvement in Vietnam, as well as the execution of that war. The Pentagon Papers were an internal, classified, and comprehensive review of the decision-making that went into the war and its planning. One of the biggest takeaways from the Pentagon Papers was that the Pentagon and our president lied incessantly to the American people. They lied incessantly to Congress and each other to keep the Vietnam War going. One of the major admissions in the Pentagon Papers was that South Vietnam was not a real country, that without America's support, the popular will was with the leadership of the communist-led North Vietnam, who America was fighting. The Pentagon Papers revealed that Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara exaggerated the number of casualties suffered by North Vietnam. He lied to the American people about how well our troops were doing. Pentagon officials knew that with 500,000 soldiers fighting and dying, they knew that at best, Vietnam would end in a stalemate. The Pentagon Papers revealed that President Lyndon Johnson lied about the Gulf of Tonkin incident, which he had used as the justification for sending troops into Vietnam. And so the Pentagon Papers served as the Pentagon's own indictment of itself, which is why it remained classified until June of 2011. The Pentagon Papers were leaked by Daniel Ellsberg in 1971, but the Pentagon Papers were officially still classified until June of 2011, 2 years after the death of Robert McNamara, the Secretary of Defense who commissioned the Pentagon Papers and who was exposed in the Pentagon Papers as a liar, a sociopath who lied every step of the way into that war. Americans would never have known about the Pentagon Papers had it not been for Daniel Ellsberg, who, after returning from Vietnam, took a job with the Rand Corporation, that's a liberal think tank, and he began Xeroxing copies of the Pentagon Papers and leaked them to the New York Times. That was in 1971. This was while the war in Vietnam was raging on, while our soldiers were dying. Because of the leak, the Washington Post began publishing stories based on the Pentagon Papers, and then the Nixon administration took these news organizations to court to prevent publication of the entire Pentagon Papers, especially as a book. They were going to publish it as a book. Immediately, the Supreme Court got involved, and in a 6-3 decision, they ruled that the government failed to prove that release of the Pentagon Papers served as a threat to our national security or as a threat to our soldiers serving in Vietnam at the time. Justices Hugo Black and William Douglas wrote in the majority decision that the press is protected so, quote, that it could bear the secrets of government and inform the people. This is what the Supreme Court ruled. The press is protected so that it could bear the secrets of government and inform the people. Hugo Black and William Douglas went on to write in the majority opinion, quote, "Only a free and unrestrained press can effectively expose deception in government, and paramount among the responsibilities of a free press is the duty to prevent any part of the government from deceiving the people and sending them off to distant lands to die of foreign fevers and foreign shot and shell," unquote. That's the Supreme Court in 1971. They went on, quote, "Far from deserving condemnation for their courageous reporting, the New York Times, the Washington Post, and other newspapers should be commended for serving the purpose that the Founding Fathers saw so clearly. In revealing the workings of government that led to the Vietnam War, the newspapers nobly did precisely that which the founders hoped and trusted they would do," unquote. The Supreme Court ruled that America could read the Pentagon Papers, but Ellsberg was still charged with violating the Espionage Act, our good old friend, the Espionage Act. He was charged with violating the Espionage Act, but 2 years later, his case was thrown out after the Watergate scandal revealed that President Richard Nixon ordered his White House plumbers to break into Daniel Ellsberg's psychiatrist's office to retrieve any files that would serve as an embarrassment, a humiliation to Daniel Ellsberg. Compromat. Our old friend, Compromat. So, what was the lesson from the Pentagon Papers? The lesson is that governments, the American government, will classify documents not to keep you and me safe, but to keep the government employees classifying these documents safe. The Vietnam War was raging in 1971, the same year the Pentagon Papers were released. And the Supreme Court knew that these classified documents didn't endanger the lives of our soldiers in Vietnam. Keeping them classified would only protect the generals, the presidents, and secretaries of defense who endangered the lives of our soldiers by sending them to fight in Vietnam based on a series of lies. The lesson from the Pentagon Papers is the American government lies. The military lies, and they commit war crimes and perjury. Documents are classified not to keep us safe, but to keep the government safe. I can assure you most, if not all, classified material has nothing to do with national security. I can assure you that classifying government documents makes us less safe. It permits rogue agencies to operate in the shadows, making us more vulnerable, more susceptible to attacks from foreign and domestic adversaries. Richard Nixon ordered rogue elements of the government, his plumbers, to break into Daniel Ellsberg's psychiatrist's office. So the other lesson from the Pentagon Papers is that the government spies on Americans not to keep anyone safe, but to keep us in line. Why does the president have at his disposal 18 separate spy agencies that we know about? Now, Nixon ordered the break-in of Daniel Ellsberg's psychiatrist's office for one reason: to get compromat on Daniel Ellsberg, to get files that would shut him up. The government, working with large corporations, continues to spy on ordinary Americans. The government, working with large corporations, gets information on Americans, information that will never hold up in court, but it's information that can be leaked to the media or shown to someone's wife or husband in order to embarrass someone. It's how you keep people in line. It's how you keep your political enemies in line. Read about the private detective in LA, Anthony Pellicano. Anthony Pellicano was able to get his hands on police files in Los Angeles, and he made a lot of money off those files. How? Well, show business managers used Anthony Pellicano to keep rogue clients in line. So did divorce attorneys. Divorce attorneys relied on the private detective Anthony Pellicano to get angry ex-wives, to prevent angry ex-wives from asking for too much money. That's why Nixon wanted Ellsberg's psychiatric files. Not to lock him up, to silence him. Ellsberg was being spied on. We're all being spied on, all of us. And they're not spying on us so they can send us to prison or to keep America safe. They're spying on you and me to shut us up. Stalin's top guy, Beria, ran Stalin's secret police. Beria spied on everyone. He knew everyone's secrets. And with that comes great power, even over Stalin. So, right now, our government is trying to extradite Julian Assange and put him on trial for violating our old friend, the Espionage Act. Julian Assange is in Great Britain right now. And unfortunately, Joe Biden's Justice Department is trying to get their hands on Julian Assange. Julian Assange, through WikiLeaks, exposed American war crimes committed by our soldiers in Iraq. There is video, thanks to Julian Assange, we've been able to see this. There is video of our soldiers in Apache helicopters laughing as they gunned down innocent civilians in Iraq. But so far, the only one facing criminal charges is Julian Assange for leaking that video. Not the soldiers who committed the war crimes. Our government instead wants to prosecute Julian Assange for exposing the war crimes. So far, the only one who served any time for those war crimes is Chelsea Manning, who gave those files to Julian Assange. I believe in a strong government, but I believe in a government that works for the people, not the rich and powerful. The rich and powerful will always use our government to further their means by sending our military, our soldiers, off to war to protect the rich and powerful's financial interests. It's a story as old as the Bible. And these military leaders, as Smedley Butler would call them, gangsters for capitalism, our military leaders lie. And they will keep secret from the soldiers and the American people the real reason these wars are being fought. And they will classify any document that reveals the real motives behind all these unnecessary wars. Most, if not all, of classified documents are not about national security. They're about protecting the military leaders and our politicians from being charged with perjury or war crimes. That's the takeaway from the Pentagon Papers. Most classified documents, like the Pentagon Papers, are about protecting the rich and powerful who force our politicians and generals, who they control, to fight wars. Now, on Thursday, here in America, a grand jury indicted Jack Teixeira. He's that 21-year-old Massachusetts Air National Guardsman who leaked classified documents on a Discord server. Now, from those documents that he leaked, the Washington Post was able to learn that the Biden administration lied when they intimated Vladimir Putin blew up the Nord Stream pipelines in the Baltic. Couple these documents that Jack Teixeira leaked with Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative journalist Seymour Hersh reporting earlier this year that it was the Biden administration that blew up the Nord Stream pipelines. And you can make a serious case that our government committed war crimes, that our government committed ecocide, that our government is responsible for one of the largest environmental disasters in history, the blowing up of those two Nord Stream pipelines in the Baltic. Yet it's Jack Teixeira who's on trial for leaking government documents. Maybe he should be on trial, but who's the real criminal? Who did the most damage? The government that blows up those pipelines, or the kid who leaks the documents? Who's the criminal? Who's the real criminal? The Secretary of Defense and United States president who lies America's way into sending 500,000 men and women to fight and die in Vietnam with almost 60,000 dead soldiers? Or Daniel Ellsberg? Who's the criminal? Daniel Ellsberg or Robert McNamara, the Secretary of Defense, who commissioned both the Pentagon Papers and the war in Vietnam? Who's the real criminal? Who broke more laws? Our Supreme Court in 1971 spelled it all out for us. They said, governments lie, and it is the job of journalists to catch those lies. Journalism isn't interviewing powerful people. It is not journalism asking presidents, politicians, or billionaires, or retired generals who are now lobbyists for Boeing, or current generals what they're thinking. Journalism is exposing their lies because they lie. All corporations, all rich people, all generals, all presidents, all governments lie. It is not journalism to hold a town hall on CNN and provide a platform to a presidential candidate so he can spread more lies. Journalism isn't interviewing the powerful and allowing them to lie. Journalism is rolling up your sleeves and interviewing the people who can prove that those people, the generals, the politicians, the presidents, the secretaries of defense, are all liars, because the people in charge are all liars. The burden lies on them to prove otherwise, and it is the responsibility of journalists to prove that they're liars. If you're a reporter who interviews these liars, you're just spreading their lies. Our Sunday morning talk shows here in America are just populated with liars and journalists who amplify the lies of the liars. You cannot correct a liar in real time. We watched the Trump town hall. When there's a fire hose of lies, you can't turn it off. Stop interviewing politicians on Sunday morning and calling it journalism. And then stop interviewing other reporters after you interview those politicians. Stop talking to powerful people and other journalists. That's not news. That's amplifying lies. Journalism isn't interviewing someone. It's gathering facts and exposing lies. As the great Bill Moyers says, news is what they don't want you to know. And he should know because before he was a great journalist, he was Lyndon Johnson's press secretary. Daniel Ellsberg was willing to die in prison. Chelsea Manning was tortured, placed in solitary confinement for the truth. The least American reporters, the least that our American reporters can do is to stop asking politicians what they think and call that news. That's not journalism. It's lying. Free Julian Assange. Spare me your tributes to Daniel Ellsberg tonight unless you followed up with free Julian Assange. I'm David Feldman, reminding you to stay strong and protect the weak.